Hi there, today we're going to look at topic 1.19, multiplying decimals. You may have experience like this guy, not really knowing where to put the decimal places when you multiply. And so we don't want to be like him, putting them everywhere. We want to know for sure, and that's what this lesson is about. So our objectives today are multiplying decimal numbers, and we're going to do it the same way that we multiply with whole numbers. The only difference is knowing how many places to move over to put our decimal place in the final answer. And this actually can be quite simple. What we do need to know about multiplying decimals that's different than adding and subtracting decimals is we don't need to line up the decimal places. In fact, if we try to do that, it ends up making things even worse. So we have some steps in the process for multiplying decimals. We can just ignore the numbers like they're whole numbers. And in fact, that's the way that I like to do it when I do the multiplication. Is I just pretend that the decimals aren't there when I actually do the multiplication. And in order to know how many decimal places I need to have in my answer, I simply add up how many I have in the problem. So I have 2 decimal places for my first number, and 1 decimal place for my multiplier, my second number. So that's going to mean that I have 3 decimal places in my final answer. And we can see below that 1, 2, 3 from the right, indeed, the decimal is going 3 decimal places. So we can then ignore the decimals completely when we multiply. 2 times 4 is 8, 2 times 3 is 6, 2 times 2 is 4. In my second row, I put a 0 as a placeholder. 1 times 4 is 4. 1 times 3 is 3. And 1 times 2 is 2. And I add those numbers up. And because of those 3 decimal places, I go from the right, 1, 2, 3 places, and place my decimal place. So it's a simple matter of counting and using that number in the final answer. So to repeat this, how my eye moves when I see 0.3 multiplied by 0.4 is first up, actually, I count my decimal places. I have 1 over here and 1 at the 0.4. So my answer is going to have 2 places. And then I just completely ignore all the 0 point. Just say, well, 3 times 4 is 12. I have to go 2 decimal places from the back, 1, 2. So I put my decimal there, pop a 0 in front, and my answer is 0.12 or 0.1200. For the second example here, I can see that I've got 1, 2, 3 decimal places and 1, 2 decimal places. So I'm going to have 5 decimal places in my answer. And again, I completely rewrite it myself as 32 times 5. So I just get rid of all the zeros and get rid of the decimals. So it's nice and clean for me to multiply. 5 times 2 is 10, and 5 times 3 is 15, plus 1 is 16. So I see that I have an answer of 160, but I'm going to now put in the 5 decimal places. So from the right, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So I will need to fill in 2 zeros and pop a 0 as the whole number. So my final answer is going to be 0.0016. And I can drop off that 0 or I can put it on. It does not matter. The answer will be the same. So let's look at the do together section, and we're going to use this same strategy and see if it works for you. The first thing we're going to do is count our decimal places. In my first number, 1, 2 decimal places, and in my second number, 1 decimal place, for a total of 3 decimal places. I can rewrite without the decimals. Visually, it will make it easier for me, or I can just ignore the decimals in the problem as presented, and I go ahead and multiply. 7 times 8 is 56, carry my 5. 7 times 3 is 21, plus 5 is 26, carry my 2. 7 times 4 is 28, plus 2 is 30, and my first row is done. For my next row, I need to put a 0 to hold the place value so that I can move over to the tens place, and I start to multiply. 2 times 8 is 16. Carry my 1. 2 times 3 is 6, plus 1 is 7, and 2 times 4 is 8, and I'm ready to add my 2 rows. I'll have a 6, a 12, carry my 1, an 8, and an 11. So I have 11, 8, 2, 6. And remember, we're dealing with decimals. I had 3 decimal places. So I'm going to go from the right, 6, 2, 8, and my decimal is going to be there. So my answer here will be 11 and 826 thousandths. For number 2, I'm going to follow the same strategy. 1, 2, 3 decimal places, 4, 5. So I'm going to write a 5 up here just for my own memory. 5 decimal places, and I'm going to go ahead and rewrite this, getting rid of those extra zeros, getting rid of the decimals, treating it like they're just whole numbers. 5 times 4 is 20. 5 times 3 is 15, plus 2 is 17. 5 times 6 is 30, plus 1 is 31. 5 times 7 is 35, plus 3 is 38. Remember, I have to go from the right 5 decimal places. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So I place the decimal in front of that 3 and pop a 0 in front. So I have quite a long decimal. Going to the 10,000ths place, really like the 100,000ths place, I can leave the answer as it is. I don't need to rewrite it without that 0. It's just fine. For number 3, you've got a huge number of decimals. 1, 2, 3, 4 in the top row. 5, 6, 7. 7 decimal places. But really, I'm focusing on 81 times 4. So I'm making the multiplication visually simpler. 4 times 1 is 4, and 4 times 8 is 32. So I'm going to be adding a bunch of zeros here. So sometimes I make these little bubbles. That helps me for sure to get the right number of zeros. So 1 space, 2, 3 places, 4, 5, 6, 7, decimal goes there, 0 in front, and every little bubble is filled with a 0. So we're going to have 4 zeros in front. And I can just rewrite that so it looks a bit cleaner. Goodness, I don't even want to read that. What place value that's going into, something like the 100 millionths or something like that. So we're getting really tiny decimal for number 3. For exercise 1.19, I'm just going to pick a couple more for us to do together. And I'm going to start with number 2. Number 2, the strategy that I showed is actually really perfect for a question like this, because if you notice, you've got a 0.05 at the top, so that's 2 decimal places. And then on the bottom, you have 3 decimal places, 0.021. So this is a total of 5 decimal places. And what they've got it set up as is the larger numbers on the bottom. Well, I'm going to flip things around. I'm going to look at this like 5 times 21. Because it's multiplication, I can do it in the order that I want. So I'm going to simplify the way this looks, and I'm going to make it easier on myself by switching the multiplier to become the 5. This makes it much faster. So 5 times 1 is 5, and 5 times 2 is 10. So my multiplication is done already, compared to this kind of jumbled mess where we have the decimals. Now I do need to make 5 decimal places, so I'm going to go from the back, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So I will be putting in 2 extra zeros, my decimal, and then a 0 as the whole number. So to write it more clearly, I'm going to have 0.00105 as my answer, and I was able to do that without doing 2 rows of multiplication. Sometimes you can't avoid the 2 rows. So let's go to number 4. We will have 2 rows to multiply. We only have 2 decimal places in our answer. So I'm going to write that above. And again, I'm rewriting it without decimals just so I can have that clean look. So I'm going to go ahead. 8 times 7 is 56. Carry my 5. 8 times 2 is 16. Plus 5 is 21. Carry my 2. 8 times 1 is 8. Plus 2 is 10. First row is done. I'm going to scratch out my carrying. And I need to place a 0 in my second row to get myself in line with the 2 in the tens place. 2 times 7 is 14. Carry my 1. 2 times 2 is 4. Plus 1 is 5. And 2 times 1 is 2. I can add my 2 rows. 6, 5, 5, and 3. And you remember, we have to go to 2 decimal places. So that's going to be right here in the middle. We're going to have 35 and 56 hundredths. So I hope that you find success in the exercises and that you consider trying to get rid of the decimals when you're doing the multiplication, yet make sure that you're counting the decimals so that you know where to put the decimal place in your final answer. Thanks, and we'll see you soon.